kind of a demonstration for tonight is going to be a thread chasing by John Huff.
Thank you, Nelson. Well, we're going to try to do hand thread chasing. So for those of you who aren't familiar with threads, I'm sure everybody knows what a thread is, but there's different ways to thread a piece of wood, and some of them are probably easier, if not a lot more expensive than others. But what we're going to try to do tonight is hand thread chasing. And I wanted to start by saying I'm certainly no expert. They say that an expert is a person that has made multiple or many mistakes in an area of a very narrow endeavor. So if that's true, and I have made a ton of mistakes on this one, then I suppose that makes me an expert. So I'll show you as much expertise as I've developed on this thing anyway. And it's tricky. I was going to start with just a little demonstration of pretty much I don't have the female part of this, but this is what the male thread basically looks like. I just happened to have this laying around. I thought it was a good way to kind of show what you're trying to do. Because when you start this out, you'll notice these the threads in these are very small. So it makes it, especially for a demonstration like this, it makes it extremely difficult to show someone what you're doing. So this is pretty much the basis of what we're going to start. Now, when you do these, there's lots of resources out there on the web to look up for how to do hand thread chasing, and the one guy that I found that I think is probably does it the best and is easiest to understand is a guy named Alan Batty. And my understanding he's passed away now, but he's an English guy. He's got a really fascinating accent too. I think it's interesting to listen to. But he's got some great tool control techniques. But he walks through this in, I want to say it's 12 minutes. He goes from what I'm going to do tonight in like 12 minutes. Now, if I could do this in 45 minutes, I'll feel. That's what we're going to try. The process goes, you start with the square blank, obviously, chuck it up between centers, round it off. And what you want to wind up with is a piece that's about 2 to 3 inches this way and 3 to 4 inches that way. So that's what he recommends for starting out a turn box. Once you get it rounded off and squared off on the ends, turn 2 tenons for whatever size your chuck is. In the past, I used to turn kind of large tenons. I was putting 1/4 inch tenons on almost everything I turned. And then we attended the class here with at Nelson's place there, and he was saying, we're turning these 12-inch platters with 1/8 inch tenons. So I thought, well, I'm going to stop making 1/4 inch tenons and start going with that. So that's what I've been doing, and I've done a number of these. I think trying to prepare for this, I did about 7 or 8 of them. So, and none of them flew off the lathe, but except for the one I jammed the chisel into. That was just a mistake. So it works, the tenons work real well. And I got to bore you with having to round them off now because everybody knows what it looks like to rough out a cylinder. So the next step on it then is to mark the cylinder. Now what he recommended doing was working in thirds. So 1/3 for the top and 2/3 for the bottom. It's a nice ratio, and it works out pretty nice. So basically you just work out what's a rough third of your project there, and I'll just do it that way. And the other thing you do is mark a center line so that you can line up the grain later. So there shows a center line on it. And one thing that I didn't show you, but whenever you mark a tenon like that, take an area, mark it just on the end, and then I have a little etched mark on my number 1 jaw so that I can line it up so that once you take it off and put it back on again, it winds up in the same jaw positions. And that way you don't wind up being 180 degrees out and then having to re-smooth your surface. For this one, it doesn't really matter if we're perfect right at the moment because we won't turn the final diameter of the vessel until we're finished hollowing everything out and stuff. So after you've marked it on the end, marked your thirds, marked a grain center line, then it's time to get on with the turning part here. The first thing we're going to do is part it off. So that's a pretty typical parting off operation that this is nice. I have a Reeves drive lathe with a handle on it, so you have to crank the handle. It's from the 1940s, and this hand is sore and from doing that so many times. So since this is going to be the bottom of it, you don't really have to worry about, and you're going to hollow out this cap portion of it, you don't have to worry about doing a real smooth job of parting it off, so you can hog it off pretty quickly. But you want to make sure that you open that channel up enough so that you're not pinching the tool. So you just set that aside. And the next step here, in terms of threading tools, parting tool you all know about, the next little effort up here is the hollow. And this is kind of a, I've never seen one of these before until I started, digging into this particular demonstration. But this is it's a hollowing tool, and it also acts as a drill, which is kind of fascinating. The other strange tool that goes with this, and you don't have to use this thing, and this is, by the way, one on steroids. this one you don't need I don't need to show you any larger version. This happened to be a wrench that was laying around the shop, and I just didn't have the time to make a holding tool. But this is used like this. It just sits like that, and you basically open up the lid, or you can do any hollowing with it. So it's basically takes the place of, it's a box scraper. It takes the place of like a bowl gouge. The guy that was doing this demonstration used no bowl gouges. He used all spindle tools, except for this piece here, which I thought was pretty fascinating. I'm not that good with a spindle gouge, and you don't get a catch with one of these very easily, so I went ahead and made one of these. And anyway, I'll show you how it works. It's kind of slick. So basically you start in at the center point and it drills. It only catches when I say it won't. But it makes short work of hollowing the thing out.
So you're pulling with your left hand down?
Yeah, and you can do it. You can also do it this way. I didn't. That is a little bit like dancing, and it can be a little bit of a challenge to do that little motion. I was getting better with it. I wanted to bring it just to show it. I almost left it at home because it's kind of an ugly thing to begin with, but also because I'm not very good with it. But this also works just by working with the tool rest on it.
Is that a burr on it, or is it just a cutting?
Just a scraper. It's called a box scraper. So it's just a 90-degree corner like that sets over. So I think this could be a less steep angle. It might be a little bit, to come up a little bit on it. Because the way it stands right now, to get a square on it, you got to come like that. But it's square at that point to the face of the. So one of the things you don't want to do when you're first starting out with this is you don't want to make this wall too thin right off the bat. There's two things that have to happen in here. One of them is you need a recess on the inside of the, I don't know if we're gonna, you need to recess on the inside of this thing so that your threading tool doesn't catch. And if you make a mistake and you have to open this back up, if you get too skinny on the sidewalls here, you'll obviously break through. So you want to leave a little room for error. You can always narrow the outside of it down, you know, when you're finished, so that you don't have a really thick wall. So anyway, that's basically the hollowing out. The second new tool is this thing, and it looks, oh, I forgot to show you this one. It looks, this is my Bart Simpson tool descriptions here. We haven't got to the threading tools yet, but we're doing these two at the moment. It's this one here. So that's pretty much the form. It's just a little hook, and it's grounded a bit of an angle. It's a scraper on the end, and then a hook scraper on the tip there. And all it does is forms this little groove that sits on the inside of the. In fact, I think what I'll do is I'll pass. That's not a real good example of it. I've just passed that one around. You'll see that that's a critical part of doing this. If you don't get, and I've tried not to do it, and you fail miserably, because what happens is you bump with your threading tool, you bump the face of that thing and it just strips all the threads off. So you need a space in the inside of your, well, yeah. That it actually isn't. It's not that dramatic. You might throw the tool across the shop, but the mistake itself is you just hear a little, and you look, stop, and you look, and you have no threads. So having done that, let's go. We're going to go ahead and scrape that little recess in. So that just sits. And by the way, the reason that this is ground like this is so that you can flatten the face of this. You want to flatten that face out. And I found that it's best to have about an 1/8 of an inch of recess in there. So there's the, I don't know if you can see the recess, but there's about an 1/8 inch deep recess, about an 1/8 of an inch wide, that sits inside. Now this face here is where we're going to start our threading. So
that limits the amount of thread you can put on it too?
It actually serves as a buffer so that you can bring your tool off before you hit that.
Well, I mean, if you wanted a deeper thread, you'd have to.
Yeah, well, you'd want to make your lip heavier. But what I've found is anything more than about 1/4 of an inch of thread is going to create problems for you. Either because it takes forever to open the box, or you wind up with a very narrow either taper in either direction and it binds. So it's best to keep, if you can get 2 or 3 threads, 2 or 3 perfect threads, 2 or 3 fairly good threads. Let's do that. It'll hold nicely. You really don't need much more than that. So now what I want to do is just round off this edge, because in order to start your threading tool, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a second, you need a space to start. You can't start on a flat, and you can't start on a raw edge like this, because the teeth it doesn't give the teeth anything to begin to cut the thread on. So that's like the next step here. And this is just scraping. I've seen some things that say do a 45, and Alan Batty recommends that you round it over. So I'm going to go with what he says and round it over. So now there's a shoulder and a round over. And before we go any further, one little critical piece of this, and I don't know if you can see. Okay, I'm going to put this up here. You need to check this face for square. So if you place a pencil in there, can you see that the line is going up? So if you take that pencil and then just compare it against the ways of the bed, you can see whether or not you're square. So this one needs to be squared up a bit. So we want to make sure we have a square face in here before we start the threads. This is basically just a bedan with a square end on it. It's also a scraping tool. And most of this stuff is all scraped. See, get a little closer to. Does that look pretty close to? Might be a little off, but. All right, here comes the fun part. So, this is an inside threading tool. There's two threading tools. There's an inside tool and an outside tool. And an outside tool. So, and you can't see that very well. So here's my Bart Simpson external and internal tools. That's what they look like. This is just an exaggerated form of it. And I'll pass around a set of vintage ones that I have not used these. But these guys are, 10 TPI. I think these are 10s. No, 12s. That's even better than a Bart Simpson. You can actually see these. So this is an outside, this is an inside. I'll pass those around. Now you can get these tools from Craft Supply sells them. I think Woodcraft sells them. There's probably some other manufacturers that sell them. I found them at flea markets. You can find them on eBay. I happen to make these two, basically copying Larry's. I'm not sure where yours were from, but I think Sorby also makes them. And so these were basically a copy of the Sorby tools. And these are 16 tooth per inch. You can get them, I think they sell 14s and 16s or 16s and 20s. I've used this one, and here's a couple of old guys that I got. I think I found these at flea market, and these are 14s. And I've heard that, threading with 14 is a little bit easier than threading with 16 or 20. What happens with these is the coarser the teeth, the faster the run. So that means even if you're down around 200 RPM, when this thing is threading, when you're threading at 16 TPI, you're threading sort of a slow motion. When you're at 12, it's a little faster. When you're at 10, it's like hustling. And you have to get out of the way of that lid. Because if you come up on that lid and you're still running, it'll crash into the head. Now, it's not disastrous. What happens is it just eats all the threads off of your newly formed threads. So then you have to open this thing up a little bit more, which is one of the reasons I left a little extra meat. So if you do have a crash, you can recover from it probably twice. And then after that, you kind of have to start over again. The smaller the teeth, the easier it is to recover. So, and it leaves you a little bit more room. So we're going to start, they recommend you start with the inside. So you do the female threads first and then do the male threads. So here we go. No, 2,000 RPM. Around, what I've been doing is around, my lathe will go down, it says 290 on the dial. So, it's a mechanical thing, so it just says 290. I don't really know what the speed is. Although I got to say, this is showing 300 and something right there. So that looks about like mine runs. So I'm going to do it at 300 because that's kind of what I'm used to. This is a little bit, boy, this is going to be fun. This is a rhythm thing. So if you ain't got no rhythm, it's a challenge. Oh, I forgot to mention, this bar and this tool, it's really important that these be smooth on the bottom. If you have a bunch of, like a regular cast iron tool rest, if you get catches and dings and stuff, usually you'll have little nicks and stuff. You need to really polish that off before you try doing this. Because if you get caught on it at all, and there's a lot of this motion stuff with these guys, if you get caught at all, it strips all your stuff off. So it begins with, here's your lead tooth, and then of course all your followers. Never use the lead to start with. You start in the center here. So then it's this little motion of, it goes like this. So it's this little circular motion of touching until you get And you'll see, well, you can't see it, but what'll happen is as you start getting this, you'll start to see a little thread forming, and then it will start to catch itself. As it starts to catch, you start to bring this tool around until you get parallel with it. So that's the way it's supposed to work. The other part is you got to stay focused, and it's really, if your mind wanders while you're doing this, your threads are gone. So it really is a kind of this exercise of trying to get with the rhythm of it and listen to what it's doing and stay on track. I'm going to turn this down just a little bit. So this is about 238. I don't know if you can notice how quickly that moves in. And I did bump the back there once already, so. Now, if you could see, well, let me do this one more. There's no extra lights around here, is there? Well, this is hard to see. Whenever it's cutting right, you see these little curls come off. Whenever you get just dust, then it's probably an indication that you need to sharpen the tool. I sharpened these just before it came.
How do you sharpen it?
Just basically it goes against the wheel like that. So it's just right, here's the teeth. So you're grinding the face. And you grind it just like that. And then you can also use a stone to just touch it off afterwards to kind of take or to sharpen it up even a little bit more. And in my shop, and I first started with nice fluorescence, because it was kind of dark down there, so that really lit the place up, and that was great stuff for about 4 or 5 years. And then I started finding, light over here would be nice to have. And then there's a task light over here. I probably have 20 task lights downstairs now, and I have 2 on the lathe. So one sits right here, blasting in this way, and so the older you get, I guess the more you need task lighting. But this is a pretty special looking in here, because this is hard to see. And so now I'm kind of going by feel. But part of what you're doing when you're doing this is this motion like this, and you're pulling with your fingers, because one of the things it wants to do is as the tool moves in, it also kind of pushes out. So you have to pull in a little bit. You don't want to pull in too much, because it'll catch, or it'll rip off the threads. But so you need to be feeling for the movement of the tool. You want to be back on these teeth instead of on the lead tooth, and you don't want to use that front tooth until you get into it and you're starting to square off. So the other part is never have a half tooth in the front. You'll see some of these tools will come from the manufacturer and there'll be a half tooth on the front. You want to have a full tooth as that lead tooth. Another thing learned the hard way.
What's the problem with it, John?
It catches. It'll catch and grab, and then what it does is it'll grab ahead, and it'll just grab far enough that it'll push like that, and it just wipes out the thread in front of the other teeth. And it's a simple fix. I mean, you just grind that off. And I'm probably pressing my luck here. So we've started to form a thread. It's not finished yet. I got about a half thread there. And I think what I want to do before I go any further on that is put a little wax on it, just to make sure it slips a little easier and we don't get so much catch. That works good for adding the wax, and it also works good for cleaning up some of the scruff that gets in there.
You want a light, John?
Pardon me?
You want a light?
Do we have one?
Back here.
Oh, that'd be awesome. Because these things are tiny, and it's tricky to see this. Now, one of the things you can do on this is when you get down real close, if you're real courageous, you just keep on going under the power thing. But if you're a little cautious and you don't like messing up what you just got done doing, you can set your thread tool in here and then start running it by hand. And it just follows the teeth. And that, I'm sure this is a little bit like cutting versus scraping. I mean, you want to use nobody wants to use a scraper in a bowl because that's not cool. But frankly, once you get about this far, nobody wants to rip all the threads off their project. So, yeah, that could be like right there. That'd be.
We'll hold it for you.
Here, we got cherry put on.
And we get some towels, okay?
So once you get your thread started, it'll follow, by hand. You could just roll this like this is really nice too because there's no resistance. Mine has pulleys and belts and stuff, so
How's that, John?
that's perfect. Thank you very much. Yeah, that's great. So you can see how it follows. It follows just like a screw. It's harder to mess up like this. It's not that it can't be done, because I've done it. Because all you have to do is like look away for a second and have your mind wander, like that. Anyway, that's one way to do it, but we're going to chance doing it the right way here. So I'm going to run this down to around 200 and we'll see. I think. Now, it's really hard to get it's hard to get this pitch, the tip of the thread there. It's really hard to get probably anything but boxwood or lignum vitae or some real dense, hard wood to form threads like this unless you use one of Larry's mechanical systems that has a spinning cutter on it. These kind of woods, it tends to flake the top of that thread off. But you still have quite a bit of the thread. The root of the thread is still there, and all you need to do is have about a half a thread in order for the other one to grip. So it'll work. It isn't as pretty as that kind of a thread is, but it does work. So I think we are pretty close to home on this one. I don't want to fuss too much with this because we only have so much time. So once you do that part, then the next part of this is removing this piece, and we're going to chuck up the tail end of it here. Now there's lots of different ways of doing this part too. This is, and they say to start this way because it's a sizing issue, and you want to size the male tenon to this. Where did I put the other half of this? This is it, right? Yep. So again, using your little reference point, if you remembered to put one on. and the reference point on your jaw. So you mate those two up. Now this isn't real critical at this point in the game. You could clean this up or not clean it up. But if you leave it here and you forget about it, when you go to marry your two pieces together, you could be fighting forever sizing your tenon or sizing your threads and not understanding why it won't why it won't meet up to the other side. So this is another one of those things that expert stuff. What happens is that little nub gets in the way and it prevents you from, mating it. Who knew? Because I sure didn't. I was really frustrated. So what we're going to do here today is I'm going to cut that off because I know it'll happen to me. That, I don't have to worry about that. So when you're sizing this, wouldn't hurt just to clean up this thread, this face here now, because when you come out of this thing, if that's messy and you already have all your threads cut, then you have a kind of an uneven surface. When you open the box up, you have all that tear out and then it just looks sloppy. So it's best to kind of get that taken care of now. That looks pretty clean.
Did you not hollow it at this point too?
No, because you need that stability on this outer lip to cut the thread, and that needs to be there through not just the threading, but once we get that thread done and this fits, this gets screwed back on, and then you'll do your face part of it to turn this to a diameter, and then to finish your top. I don't recommend doing that until after the top's done. So top gets done, then you hollow out. But the next step is to...
You couldn't hear his question.
Oh, I'm sorry. He asked if you would hollow it now. And generally, you hollow it afterwards. You hollow it after the threads are complete. Threads are complete and the top's done. And it has to do with stability. So now we're going to size a tenon for this thing. One of the things you want to do is not make your tenon any deeper than the threaded area, because it's challenging to get the two to mate. I know that by experience too. So that's the next step. What we're going to do is we're going to use this as the sizing tool. So I'm going to bring this one down with a spigot that's probably about 1/8 of an inch spigot. And this method kind of avoids the fussiness of calipers. And all you're trying to do is get this little spigot to come right on the inside of these threads. So that'll give you the root diameter then of your thread. So when you see the English guy do this on the video, he steps right up to this thing and nails it. Boom, see, that's how it's done. And when I try to do that, it's boom, see, watch me have to cut a new tenon. So there we're getting really close. In fact, I think we're probably in there. There's a reason for doing this little tenon part here. And what it does is identifies, like I said, that root diameter of the thread, and then when you make the rest of your tenon here, you want to leave enough wood there for the thread. And it's best to err on fat. If you look at your threading tool, and you can see that on those, obviously there's not a lot of thread there. So that's the thickness of this, the difference between this stub and this part. What I found is that it's a lot easier to keep sizing it down. You can't add wood back on, but you can take it off. So it's easier to start a little fat, and that's probably, I think we're just about, that's about where we ought to be. The next part you want to do is you need a little V groove in the back of, where's that little tool at? You need a little V groove in the back here so that you have, just like on the cap, you had that recess in the back so your tool has a place to end without bumping into the end. You need a little space back here for that too. So we're going to cut that. And face that at the same time. So that's the thread length. This little tenon here, or the stub tenon, is there for two reasons. First, so when you're running your tool, I wish you could see this better. So when you bring your tool back, it gives you a place to escape. So you're coming back and escaping. Once you get down to the bottom of your thread, when this starts to leave an impression on here, you know you're at you should be pretty close to your final thread depth. If that turns out to be a little too fat, you just take the top of the threads off. So you just cut the top of the thread off and you go again. Because once you get to the depth of these tools, it doesn't cut anymore. What it'll wind up doing is just ripping the threads off. So it's real important that once you get to that depth, that you don't keep pushing, that you go ahead and remove those thread ties. I've tried. It doesn't want to play. So that's so now we're on to threading this part. So again, you want to get down somewhere between 200 and 300 RPM. And this is a little, this isn't as weird as doing the inside threads because at least you can see the whole thing. But it's the same kind of dance. We need to round over that edge. Give yourself a lead there. All right, so again, it's a scraping tool, not a cutting tool. So you're going to be at a little bit of an angle, and then you want to establish. It's a bit of a dance routine. Again, he shows this motion of this. It's like a rotary motion like this. I can't get that down. That's just one of those things. My wrist and the rest of my rhythm doesn't want to play. So what I found is just easier to go in a circular motion. Hang on here a second. I don't think I have enough of a... Oh boy. Got myself into a little bit of a bind here. See these little shavings? It means I sharpened it right. Wasn't doing that before. We're getting close. And as you come in on this thing, you start, way over here, and you're working it back, and you slowly bring it up to your 90 degrees, and now you're cutting with that lead tooth. So then at that point, you sort of tilt it back against so you're not quite square to that. And this gets a little easier here because you can come into this thread low, and it just follows the thread, then you can just raise the handle up and it starts to cut. Ah, dang it. That's where it rips the threads off. I knew I was getting too confident. Well, I didn't. Yeah. Well, actually, I only looks like it only broke like a part of one or two threads there. So I was actually kind of lucky. So let's see how close we got. I think it's fat. Yeah, well, this is a good thing because now that busted thread is not as meaningful. So now what you want to do, this is to size it up. You'll bring it up to turning speed again and just trim a little bit, ever so little off of that. A little gun shy of that shoulder. Okay, now if you can, you probably can't, but on this lead tenon here, that little stub tenon we cut, now we're starting to get threads on that. So that means we should be pretty close to that size. Now this can go on, by the way, ad infinitum. So, I mean, I've gotten to this point in like 20-30 minutes. Yeah, it's still too fat. So again, oh, we haven't got it quite down there yet. This is a little bit like watching paint dry from over there, I'm sure. And I can see I'm just starting to get a taper there. But what you really want to do is you want to get that first couple of threads going, then you know you're there. Okay, so now it's just a matter of, you can see, I don't know, can you see the taper from there? Now we'll just take and trim the tips of the threads off back here, drop that shoulder back a little bit more, and we should be able to run 2 or 3 more and get a thread. So let's do that real quick. If you're familiar with, I think it's, is it Chris Pye? Anyway, Pye, the guy's last name is Pye. He talks about the uncertainty of, was the risk in workmanship and the uncertainty of, machines take the uncertainty out. Now, to a certain extent, the thread chase is a machine, but there's a lot of risk doing this, and the further along you get into this, the more time that's in it, the scarier this all feels. I guess it's the uncertainty of, what's it called, uncertainty of workmanship, of risk, I can't remember. Some philosophical work that's makes perfect sense, but machines kind of take a lot of the, they can take a lot of the risk out of it, because of course there's your threads. You could cut these by hand, but this establishes a certain, takes the risk out of it to a certain extent, but it, I gotta stop talking. Tight, but it's there. So this process just kind of goes on until you get it right, and we're getting real close here. All right, let's see where we're at here. It's almost. So now what I'm going to do, we're getting, let me see this. You see it's still flat on the top, so I think we got room there for like just a couple more cuts there. But before we do that, I'm going to put a little wax on this to try to keep it from splintering, and it'll make it run a little better. And this is just paste wax. Just an advertisement for Johnson's there. But it works really well, and it works good for a finish too. That one's just paste wax there. And for woods on these things, I have some in walnut there, and walnut works fairly well. This is apple, and I think this takes a much better thread, but it still tends to crumble. This just a little brass brush to kind of, I hope, get the last of the scruff off it. think I got it cross-threaded there. It's close. It's one to roll up on one of the last few threads. You know what? I'm a coward. This is where you get the crash. And at least when you do it this way, and I actually thought on mine, some metal lathes, they make cranks for threading, so that you can actually just turn it by hand, and that way you can just reverse the thread, and you can cut metal threads that way. Usually they're really tiny threads when you're doing that, but I thought that might be for my lathe especially, since it's a little tough to spin the chuck with it. I thought that might be a smart idea. But for this, if you have one of these lathes, this is so easy to spin by hand, it makes you wonder why you do it under power. That actually looks like a pretty decent thread. I think it's crossing on something in there. Well, this is where it gets tricky. I'm getting across threads for some reason. And I'm going to guess it's in the lid because these look really good. All right. And I may have gotten a double thread started somewhere in there because I can feel that slip. Well, that's why I did this, just in case we ran into that problem. Where's the cap at? If you'll pass that forward. This is pretty much where we're at. Now I could go back at this point and probably rechase that one real quick. But basically what you wind up with is it slides on like that. And now is when you would go ahead and hollow it out. So I don't know, what time is it? How far? So I'm at my max here. I don't really want to, I could bore you with hollowing. It's basically just like hollowing any other bowl. You go in there. I did use this particular tool to get in there real fast, and this really makes a difference on small hollows like that, because you can get right in there and it goes very quickly. Then the final effort there is once you get your threads finished off, that's kind of a bummer, but workmanship of risk. And there's a risk there. Best I can figure is I got a double thread in here somehow, and I don't see it. I could chuck it back up and hand turn it real quick, and well, let me do it. I don't think we're that late. And this is why you put that. Alan Batty.
B-A-T-T-Y?
I'm not sure if it's B-A-T-Y or B-A-T-T-Y. T-T. He's great. It makes it look so easy that.
Yeah, his son is Stuart. The Stuart doesn't do much hand chasing.
And he just he's a master. I mean, the guy's an artist. Clearly he's he's been a turner for a long time, but watching him do it is impressive. And it's the first time you watch it, you look at that and go, we can do this. We can do this. And then you start doing it, it's like, wow, dude, how'd you do that?
I'll demonstrate.
Just for some reason, it's right on that one thread. Wow, I am confused. Well, there's nothing to lose by throwing a little power on it, right? Yeah, I'm just getting a cross on it. I don't know, you can see it. This is the first time this happened, so I'm truly an expert now. Because I managed to make that fail. So, but anyway, that's the process. And then you go from there to refine it. So after you cut the threads, you hollow the top. Top solid. And then you just hollow the body. So basically you just hollow it out. And then finish off the bottom. Top. And if you're lucky, you get something that looks like that. I'll pass that around. It's just proof it does work. This actually was, I think, the third one I ever did. And I thought, oh, what a piece of cake. You know, this is an easy thing to do.
Beginner's luck. Trap.
So then you get to this, you know, and that's, this is like the scoops. I made 1 million scoops until the last one I did, and then it blew apart. So that's wood threading 101. So there's that little guy too.
You know, you can be replaced by a $600 machine.
I know. I'll tell you, it's days like this that makes you want to buy one.
How tough is it to get the grain to line up?
That's not so bad. What they tell you is, so this one's almost there, and here you can see the line's about 1/4 off. You probably can't see it, but here's the line and here's the start line. So what they tell you is, don't take it off the male end. Take it off the female end. Take it off, you know, remove the threads here, because and then slowly, you just, you know, take a little scraper to the edge and lightly touch it, and then just work closely until you get to within about, I'd say within probably 1/4 inch of that line, and then go ahead and turn your face, because what'll happen is as you're turning, it'll tighten and usually lines itself up. But it's not terribly difficult to do. I only did it, I think I did it once with the little walnut one. That one's pretty close. And I think all total I did 6 or 8 of these. And they all worked except for this one and one other one. So, I mean, it's not 100%. But I mean, if I was doing this in the shop, I would probably turn this off and do it again. Just make a shorter bowl. So that would be the direction I would go on that. You could still save it. That's another reason why you don't hollow it out in the beginning. So if you were asked about that, because you could just knock that off, put a new tenon on it and go again. If you start with a little longer piece, you know, it's like the bowl that starts out at 12 inches and you wind up at 4. It's one of those things, but it is a challenge. If you make your own tools, it doesn't cost much. You know, you can buy a piece of tool steel for a couple of bucks and file those in with just a regular saw, a 3-cornered file, and you mark them out with like a 16 would be every 16th of an inch, and just file those grooves in at about just a little bit of an angle, and it comes out nice. Or like I said, you can buy them online. They're about 90 bucks for a set of threading tools. You could buy the mechanical version, and I'm guessing, I know one of them was $600 or $700. I don't know what the one you were telling me goes in a tool post.
The new easy one is $199.
No, that's not.
$200. No,
that's not so hard to swallow.
Yeah, it might be a bit more than that. I'm not quite sure. It takes forever for them to deliver it, but well, they're actually made in. I think at least it's assembled here, but the parts are made in England. You've got to get those.
There's another, aside from Alan Batty, I think Richard Raffin has a book called The Complete Turner or something like that. And that one is, when I first did the first ones, I thought, what a piece of cake. I used that book as a guide. I couldn't find the book. I don't know what I did with it. But it wasn't at the house, and maybe it's in the library here, and I just borrowed it one time. But it apparently the instructions there were good enough that I could get through it very quickly, very easily. But this particular method has been a little bit more of a challenge for me. But any other questions?
What was the screw in the end of your piece for?
Screw on the end of the piece. I'm not
Where's
understanding.
the other part?
They fit nice.
This one?
Wasn't there a screw in the end of that? Yeah.
Oh, that's just gray paint. That was just this was an apple tree that Mari and I cut down, and I just put gray, leftover gray paint on it to keep it from drying too fast. We cut this down
Oh, okay.
6-8 years ago. I don't know. So it's pretty dry. But an apple works really well for this, and I'll just pass that one around. The thread in that turned out nice. The thread on this one, I don't know, doesn't look bad, but now it's too big. You can pass that around too. Any other questions? That concludes hand casing.